So we're taking a plunge now in our third theme, which is human beings made in the image of God as creating creatures. Creating creatures. Dennis Baki, in his book, Joy at Work, says that God intended that the workplace be beautiful, exciting, and satisfying. Work was to be filled with joy. Work is a major reason for our creation. It was intended to be an act of worship, one of the most significant ways in which we can honor our Creator. Now, a little bit later today, we're going to look at what happened with the fall. So it's not perfect. But this is what God intended. And before I express what God really had in mind, and what to which we can be largely restored because of Christ, I want to look at some assumptions. And one assumption, which I've already expressed, is that you are doing the Lord's work in the marketplace. Not all of you are in the marketplace, but people who do work in the marketplace, not just business, but all human enterprise, are actually doing the work of the Lord's work. The second is that there are no hierarchies of ministries with respect to pleasing God. Now, in most of the world, the missionary is the absolute top. Missionaries please God more than plumbers, more than doctors, more than business people, more than homemakers. When I became a Christian, I had hired for a weekend that I planned a pastor to speak. And the only thing I could remember his saying was a lie. He said, God had called me to be a missionary when I was 16 years of age. He said, I refused to go, so God fixed it so I could never go. He made me have a motorcycle accident. My left leg was mangled, and I'm lame, and no mission board will take me. So now I am doomed to do God's second best, which is to be a pastor. Now, below the pastor is the counselor, the teacher, the doctor, and then towards the bottom, the business person. In Korea, it's different. The pastor is the top, and the missionary is just under the pastor. And then you have all the other occupations. But there is no hierarchy of ministries with respect to pleasing God. Thirdly, you can't go to church, you are the church wherever you go. My very first mentor taught me this, and he said, churchgoer is a bad word. You can't go to church. You are the church wherever you go. So the church is like the rhythm of the blood in the human body that gathers in the heart and lungs for oxygenation and cleansing, and then is pumped out to the tips of the fingers and toes to bring nutrients, enzymes, and hormones. In the process, it gets tired, dirty, has to come back to the heart and lungs for oxygenation and cleansing. That's the church. Fourthly, there's no place in the world so demonized that a Christian might not be called to serve there. Sometimes people say, oh, you couldn't work in advertising. Yes, you can. God could call you, to work in advertising. Oh, you couldn't work in national politics. Well, yes, God could call you to work in that very difficult arena. Or you can't work in the media. Well, media is a difficult world to work in. I'm not talking about Christian media. I'm talking about so-called secular media. So there's no place so difficult. Lots of places I can't go because I'm too vulnerable in some areas. But God might call somebody to be there. What makes work Christian is not the religious character of the work, that the Bible is open and God's name is being spoken, but the fact that the work is done with faith, hope, and love. That's what makes work Christian. So it's possible to preach sermons that is not Christian work. And it's possible to make tables or to serve on tables that is Christian work. Got it? Those are my assumptions. We're now looking at the creation and the creature. And the Genesis account of creation is based on a covenantal relationship with God. It's not the obligation of human beings to fulfill in order to be accepted by God, but it's the outworking of a promise and covenant which God has made with His creation and with His creature. So instead of calling Genesis the creation mandate, we could call it the covenant mandate. As Karl Barth says, covenant is the inner meaning and purpose of our creation as human beings in the divine image. A covenant is like a pair of binoculars through which you can look one way and see things that are in distance close up. But when you turn it around and look the other way, everything looks far away. The covenant links us to God in such a way that we can see through it to God's covenant with His people. But at the same time, our experience of human covenant in marriage, for example, becomes a kind of lens through which we can see something about the covenant that God makes. Covenant is different from a contract. A contract is an agreement to exchange goods and services upon certain terms. So my last computer got baptized. I bet your computers have not been baptized, but I dropped it in the Pacific Ocean. I didn't mean to do it, but it got baptized against its will, and it got ruined. So I went to Staples to buy this computer. Today, I could buy this for $400, but I paid almost $2,000 for it. And you know how the prices are coming down. So I gave my credit card to the agent, and he gave me the computer. But if he had not produced the computer, I would have said, I want my money back. That's a contract. But a covenant is an agreement to belong and is symbolized in the marriage vows. I take you for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, until death us do us part. In the Bible, the covenant is essentially a relational, founded reality. I am yours, God says, and you are mine. That's in several places of the Bible. I am your God, you are my people. When you become a Christian, that's what it is. Jesus says, you're mine, and I'm yours. It's wonderful. So, that's the relational foundation. But there are obligations in the covenant. And the obligations in the covenant God made with Israel was twofold. To bless God. So He arranged for the sacrifices and the priesthood and the festivals. And so we were to bless God. That's the first obligation. And the second is to be faithful. And the Ten Commandments is the lifestyle of fidelity, of faithfulness. So a woman in marriage said, I am determined to stay in this wretched relationship until the day I die, thought she was keeping the covenant because she was not sleeping with other men. But she was breaking the covenant because she would not bless her husband. Got it? Now, if you keep the obligations, there's the blessings of the covenant. The land and people and satisfaction and plenty, all of that comes from keeping the obligations of the covenant. What happens if you don't? If you fail to bless or you fail to be faithful, then you experience the curses of the covenant. Now, I have been a carpenter for many, many years, and I hope you can understand this illustration. If you take a block of wood and a wood plane, and you plane with the grain, you have a smooth surface. But if you take the same block of wood and plane against the grain the other way, you tear up all the fibers and the surface is rough. When we don't go God's way by keeping the obligations, we tear up the fibers of our lives and experience what the Bible calls the curses of the covenant. But while the blessings of the covenant are conditional on obedience, the covenant itself is unconditional. So in the Bible, God says, oh, I think I will divorce my people, but I can't. How can I give you up, O Ephraim? And those of you who have come to Christ, God will never divorce you. That's fantastic. Even when you're unfaithful, He's not going to give you up. Now, God made a covenant with creation. Jeremiah 33, 20 to 21 talks about the covenant God made with day and night. And He said, as long as that covenant is held, there'll be a descendant of David on the throne. Well, this is a very beautiful little clip from public information on the internet. But night arrives between Europe and Africa. It's nightfall in Brazil. And then in North America, you can see nightfall coming and day waning. So there is a covenant with creation, a covenant with humankind, a covenant with God's own people. So you have a covenant with Noah and with Abraham and with Israel and with the church. So an Old Testament theologian, Bill Dumbrell, says the pledge of divine obligation to creation as affected by the flood, which is the substance of the covenant with Noah, seems to refer to the basic commitment God has made to creation itself. That is, God renews His covenant with Noah, but it's a covenant that has already been made with creation. So God belongs to His creation, and His creation belongs to Him, and He's not going to divorce it. So within that covenantal context, I want to develop what work was meant to be by God's design for creatures who are made in the image of God. First of all, we are called to live in communion with God. That is, Adam and Eve were placed in a sanctuary garden to experience continuous communion with God. It's not a pleasure garden, it's a sanctuary. A place of beauty and of the presence of God. This is a full-time job, not 1 hour Sunday morning. Adam and Eve had no church services, no church buildings, no pastors. But they were to live 24/7 in the presence of God. As I open up the Bible, I don't think human beings have one job, using your phrase job, one work, if you like, one kind of work. We have 3 full-time jobs. The first is communion with God. We're called to that. Human beings placed in the garden were called to extend the sanctuary garden into the world. So let me try to express it this way. The man and the woman, the male and the female, were placed in a sanctuary garden with a 2-directional ministry, downwards to creation, to take care of the earth, but upwards to bless God and to worship God. So their priesthood was 2-directionally, downwards and upwards. That was in the garden, which is a sanctuary. In Genesis, the garden is in the land of Eden. It's not the Garden of Eden, but it's in the land of Eden, which is human beings' home, their homeland. So the garden, the sanctuary, was in the home. But then there's another circle of other lands, like Havilah, where the gold is good. That's the world. And without saying these exact words in the text, when God says to Adam and Eve, fill the earth, He isn't just saying populate the world. He's saying fill the earth with the glory of God. So we are to extend the sanctuary into the world. How do we do that? Through work. Through work. And we do it today. We extend the sanctuary into the world as the people of God go into the workplace. Work is an expression of our communion with God, because God is a worker, and we cannot fulfill what it means to be a human being fully without working. Work was intended to be part of our worship. I mentioned to you before, would it be a good thing if you had so much money that you never had to work? No, wouldn't be good. Spiritually, wouldn't be good. Because work is part of our worship and an arena of spiritual growth. The Lord God took the man, put him in the Garden of Eden to work the ground. Chapter 2, verse 15, the Hebrew word avad means both to work and to serve, used of priestly service and worship. And to take care of it, shamer, that means to guard and take care of it, used for the same way that God takes care of us. So that's what we're called to do. Work is meant to be part of our dignity as God-imaging creatures and a means of spiritual growth. So, Genesis 1, 26 to 30, chapter 2, verse 15, suggests again that all that exists, I'm quoting from Alexander Schmemann, all that exists is God's gift to man, and it all exists to make God known to man and to make man's life communion with God. The human being, Alan Richardson said, is so made that not only can he not satisfy his material needs without working, but also he cannot satisfy his spiritual needs or fulfill his function as a human being. The first test of human beings in the garden was in the context of work, harvesting fruit. I've often thought, why did God put that tree in the garden? The tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And say, you're not to have that. That tree represents taking pleasure and provision and power away from me and not having communion with me. Why did he do that? Because Adam and Eve would never grow without being tested. Why did the Holy Spirit take Jesus into the wilderness to be tempted by Satan? Because Jesus had to grow as a human being, though he was sinless. And a parent who protects their child so that they never experience any testing will have an adult child. They'll never grow. So that first test, which was part of their growth as human beings, was in the context of working. Worship can be something we do every minute of every work day as we experience God's guidance and purpose in our lives. This is from the Desert Fathers. These were men and women that went into the desert to search for God. Someone said to the blessed Arsenius, how is it that we, like with all our education and our wide knowledge, get nowhere where these Egyptian peasants become so virtuous? And he responded, we indeed get nothing from our secular education, but these Egyptian peasants acquire the virtues by hard work. So we actually grow most in work, not just in education. And Teilhard de Chardin said, our work appears to us in the main as a way of earning our daily bread, but its essential virtue is on a higher level. Through it, we complete in ourselves the subject of the divine union. And through it again, we somehow make to grow in stature the divine term of the one with whom we are united, our Lord Jesus Christ. So first of all, we're called to communion with God. Secondly, we're called to build praiseworthy forms of communion on earth, building the human community and building the faith community. So this is our second full-time jobs. And that means we're full-time husbands and wives, full-time friends, full-time sons and daughters, full-time neighbors, full-time community builders. I travel a lot, and sometimes I'm in a hotel, and there is a woman dressed very seductively who wants me to think of myself as a part-time husband. You know, very dangerous. I'm a full-time husband. Standing here today, my wife is Gail, and I am a husband. It's a full-time job. Here's some examples. Building community in Slovakia around a dinner table. This is not a very special dinner table, and there's no, I'm sorry, there's no kimchi on it. But you can see there's lots of just ordinary things, but what's happening? Community is being built. Here's two men in Beijing, early morning, having tea on the street, talking, building community. This is our family. Actually, when we were 18, because my wife's parents died last year at 98 and 95. So this is the last picture we have of 4 generations, 18 of us. So we are made by God to be relational creatures. And it says in Genesis 1:27 that God made us in His image, male and female, He made them. Remember that God is lover, beloved, and love itself. Many scriptures emphasize this. John 15, as the Father loved the Son. John 17:24, you loved me, Jesus said to the Father, even before the creation of the world. And work itself is a social activity. We're called to work together in partnership. Work and the organizations of work impact society. Just think of what Hyundai means to Korea, and then the experience of workplace itself. We become who we are in relationships. This is a picture of my wife Gail on the left, and a friend. We're in Africa here, mending clothing. But I think particularly you women really understand the fellowship that you have when you work together on a project like sewing or mending or something like that. My friend Zinette in the Philippines, who's building community in a class. And Lowell Baki, again, building community in a class. And here is a tour guide in the Philippines, again, building community with a group of people seeing things. And this is a class situation where people are learning together in a class as we are here. The difference is you're sitting in rows and they're sitting around a table. Here are some people working together in building a water cistern in Africa. So human beings are like icons of God. They are beings in community. We're built for community. We work in community. And at the center of the universe is relationship. A God who is Father, Son, and Spirit. There are two key ways and reasons why relationships are central to human life. We live in relationships. We live for relationships. And our identity is both in being and doing. Not just being, not just doing. Now, I don't know Korean names, but there are so many English family names that are the trade of the family. Like the English word baker. A family name. Well, they're bakers. Carpenter. Well, they're carpenters. And on it goes. But you see, that's not their whole identity. Not just in what they do, but in their being as well, which is relational. And it's very interesting that the English word company is made of two phrases from Latin. Cum means together, and panis means bread. A company is a way of sharing bread, sharing livelihood, sharing nurture. And exchange is built into creation. I'll paraphrase this sentence because Kenneth Conser says, by creation, we are each made as social beings. We were never intended to live alone, but each one of us is specialized and unique. And you have something that I need, and I have something you need. And the only way we can live together is actually for you to exchange what you have with what I have to give to you. And he said, that is business. So you might say, built right into our creation is the idea of social exchange, which gets expressed in a variety of ways, including in business. You take this pencil, for example, and you begin to ask questions about Where does the wood come from? Probably Canada. Where does the lead come from? Well, not Canada. Where does the rubber come from on the end? And then you begin to think of all the people that are involved in its manufacture, its design, its transportation, its marketing, and so on. And Martin Luther King Jr. said, "Before you finish breakfast this morning, you have depended on more than half the world." There's a drawing that goes with this, and they actually point out in a house where things come from. Taiwan, Honduras, Chile, and so on. You've got things from all over the world. My film camera got stolen in Spain, and so I bought a digital camera, a Nikon. I said, wow, Japanese technology. But when I looked at the body, made in Taiwan. And then I looked at the lens, made in China. In fact, when I bought this computer, I said to the agent, "Was this made in China?" He said, "Sir, everything in this store is made in China." That's not true, because in some stores, a lot of things are made by Koreans. So we do community building in the workplace. We cultivate teamwork. We try to humanize the organizational culture. And we are trying to be personal. Try to bring affirmation and accountability. Now, I have a cell phone, and I just talked to my wife a few minutes ago, which is really great. And one great thing about the telephone is you can hear the tone of the voice, and you immediately. I also do dozens of emails every day. But I have a friend who has a very good rule. He says, use email only for the transmission of information. I will be home at 8:15 tomorrow night. That's transmission of information. Never use email for making a decision. Why? Because you need to hear how people are responding. And so use the telephone for a decision. But never use the telephone to discipline someone. Only face to face. And I've received emails from a superior, a boss, if you like, that were critical and disciplinary. And you think, and it's just not good. And so we have to find ways of being personal and relational in the workplace. This is my friend who runs a virtual business. He has 8 employees, but nobody else works in his city. One is in Australia, and the other is in various states of the United States. It's a virtual business. Is it community? I think so. And we can develop and cultivate organizational cultures. Organizational cultures on the outside have symbols and artifacts. You came into a room where all these rows look forward, and I'm standing higher than you, and that's significant. You go into a Presbyterian church, and what's in the very center? The pulpit, right? Because the Word of God is central. You go into an Anglican or Episcopal church or a Catholic church, what's in the right in the very center? The altar. You go into a community church, and what's in the center? Drums. These symbols and artifacts are important, but underneath the symbols and artifacts are values. And values are cherished ways of behaving. But underneath the values are essential beliefs, like the equal dignity of men and women, the equal giftedness and value of men and women. That's an example of an essential belief. And as we work with organizations to build community, we have to work with organizational cultures too, on all 3 levels. symbols, values, and beliefs. You might even want to describe some of the symbols and values and beliefs of your organization. Some of you are pastors. You would describe it for your church. Some of you have been working in business. You can describe it for your business. And some of you have been working in a hospital, a medical institution, and you can describe the organizational culture of that hospital and how you can build community. Thirdly, we are called to develop the potential of creation and to humanize the earth. So this is our third full-time job. First, communion with God. Secondly, community building. And thirdly, co-creativity. And our work unfolds the potential of creation and participates in God's ongoing work. So we are like God not only in being relational, male and female, He made them, but also we are like God in working and resting. So several texts speak about our working with God. Psalm 90, Nehemiah 6:9, and Genesis 4:1. In Genesis 4:1, Eve said, "With the help of the Lord, I have brought forth a man." There is a wonderful text of the co-creating with God. Things are actually created twice. First in the mind, you kind of think it through. So sometimes when I'm lying in bed before I go to sleep, I'm actually imagining something that I want to make. But then the second way we make it is in material, which may be a service or it might be a product. So we are not only like God in that we are relational beings, but we're like God who is also a sender, sent, and sending. That is, a God who goes outside of God's self. And there are several texts about this. I'll only quote one from John 20:21. "As the Father has sent me, even so I am sending you." There's sending within God. It's not just that God sends everybody on mission, but within God, the Son is sent by the Father. "As the Father has sent me, even so send I you." So our connection with God is twofold. One is in our relationality, and the other is in our work, our regency. A regent is a person who functions for a king or a queen when that king or queen is out of the country or is too young to rule. And we are regents of our God, representing the king. So work and stewardship involves co-creativity. We are to do this work fruitfully and to guard God's creation from evil. We improve human life in all kinds of ways by making tools, making beauty, music, comfort, communication, transportation, toys, and accounts, making images, food and home, health, garden, research, and meaning makers. Now, I only know one Chinese word, and I never know whether I'm saying it in Cantonese or Mandarin. Sung Yi. Which is it?
Mandarin.
Mandarin. Boy, better, even better than Cantonese. It's the Chinese word for business. And it's made up of two pictures. The first one is to create. And the second one is meaning. The Chinese understand what business is about. It's a way of creating meaning. These are my friends who are sculptors in Slovakia. They are creating meaning through their work. A fisherman in Thailand. My father-in-law who took the yellow rape. Do Do you know what rape is in English? Not the terrible thing that's done to women and men, but the flower that is yellow that produces the oil called rape oil. And he took that rape and genetically modified it to remove 2 acids that were considered to be carcinogenic. And from that produced canola oil. And it was my mother-in-law who said, don't call it rape. It's such a bad name in English. Call it Canadian oil, canola. So all over the world now, people use canola for doing their deep fries and so on. A fisherman, a person selling vegetables in Finland, pedicab driver in India. So the Lord God took the man, put him in the Garden of Eden to work the earth and take care of it. And this word conservative actually means to serve jointly. The earth and living things serve us, and we serve them. So to summarize, the creation and the Creator. The application of this to work is, we have 3 kinds of work. We have communion with God. Some people have remunerated work in that. Pastors, spiritual directors. But all of us are called to have communion with God. But the pastors that have remunerated work in communion, they also have to be community builders and co-creators. Okay? Full-time jobs. Second full-time jobs, community building. Husband, wife, brother, sister, son, daughter, neighbor. Some people have remunerated work in that. Town planning, counseling, pastoring. But all of us are called to be community builders. And thirdly, we are called to co-creativity. And most of us, most human beings, have their remunerated work in co-creativity, which is all the ways that we unfold the potential of creation. So Martin Luther says work should be done to serve God, by it, to avoid idleness, to satisfy His commandments. And Luther spoke slightingly or negatively of people who do not use their talents in their calling or in the service of their neighbor. They use them only for their own glory and advantage. Summarizing, work and rest are part of our God-imaging identity. Work is a means and context for communion with God and growing spiritually. Work is meant to be a social and communal activity, a means of building community. And as co-creators with God, we are making the world.